My name is Karim Rahemtulla, and I'm the Managing Director of Artscape Daniel's Launchpad. I was actually born in Africa, born in Kinshasa. My family was actually born there as well. My parents' parents are originally from the west coast of India and Gujarat, and they immigrated to East Africa in the early 1900s. I was born there, but I left very quickly after that. I was about 6 months old, and I actually grew up in Santiago in Chile. After we lived there for about 7-8 years, we moved to Canada, and we were fortunate again, in the sense of my parents' forethought around this, because one of the most important things that they've always believed in is a sense of democracy. And in 1974, we left Chile during the Civil War there, came to Canada as UN refugees. We moved to Toronto, lived in Toronto for about a year. I then moved to Kitchener and lived there for a couple of years. And then we finally moved out to the West Coast. So I grew up in Vancouver, have lived there almost all my life until the past 4 years where I permanently moved back to Toronto. So a little bit of a journey, but a very interesting one. My family picked Canada for a few reasons, being able to live in an environment where everyone is accepted. That was really important for them, that they didn't go into a country where people weren't accepted for who they are. At the same time, there was another migration taking place from East Africa during the Idi Amin, when he was the president of Uganda, and he actually was expelling all the Asians out of Africa, out of Uganda. There was a mass exodus of Ismaili Muslims that were coming to Canada. That was another reason. We are part of the Ismaili Muslim community, and my family felt that they also wanted to come back to a place where that community was also looking to be placed long-term. And then the third reason is education. My parents felt that it would be really important for me as a child to get a really good education, and they felt that Canada was one of the best places in the world to do that. I would say as a child when I moved to Canada, my goals were very different. I remember telling my parents I wanted to be a pilot, and maybe that's a reason why I went back and did humanitarian work, because it did allow me to travel the world, but not as a pilot, but actually as one that was working in the humanitarian sector. I always felt the notion of wanting to give back. My ideas around what I wanted to do revolved around helping people. Our community is very much built around the idea of volunteerism and giving back to the communities you live within. And that was really important for me. I would say in the early 2000s, I really felt a need to go and do something a little bit more where I was giving back my skill sets, not necessarily Canada, but to wherever it would be best served. And that's when I joined the Aga Khan Development Network, and I spent 13 years with them, primarily working in emerging countries globally. In fact, my first year I spent in Pakistan working there, really getting to understand what is social development about, why is it important, and why is it also really important for the rest of the world to be supporting emerging countries. I then went over to Syria, worked there, lived there for about 6 months as the Aga Khan Development Network was establishing itself in that country. Following that, I took on different responsibilities in the area of culture. That's the driving point that brought me to Artscape. A lot of our work was around how do we look at cultural assets, how do we rehabilitate them, but also readapt them to use in the communities that they are there. That served as a really strong fundamental learning for me to understand why culture is important. Communities of different ethnicities have an ownership and a stake where they live, and how do they build the fabrics of those communities. A lot of the areas that we worked within transcended also by different travelers. So you look at the Silk Route, you think of the times of the Mughal, Alexander the Great, they actually went across a lot of the different countries that I had a chance to work in. As you go through this, you're actually realizing that even within these countries, there's subcultures there as well. My last project with the network was the startup of the Aga Khan Museum in Toronto. I think that gave me a really solid grounding as to why culture and education become important, and why do we need to understand different people from where they come from. And not necessarily for their religion or who they are, but really for the value sets that they bring, and the value sets that art and culture can bring into different communities. In all of our cities, I really believe that culture plays an immensely important role in determining the fabric of those communities. Culture is an easy binder for different communities, and look at the good that comes from it. So I think we need to do more and more of that as a multicultural community, continue to grow and continue to look at Canada as a really multicultural community, and not built of one idea, but built of many ideas. And that is really why I really love being a Canadian. Having grown up as an entrepreneur, such a deep interest in the cultural and arts sector, the opportunity to get into a project like Artscape Daniel's Launchpad was really fortunate to be able to build a team, but also look at that integration between entrepreneurship and creativity, and how do we bring it together. That became really important to me. If we look at the project today, it is really one about creativity. It is one about bringing people together, and it is one that can redefine how we look look at art and culture in the city. A lot of what I talk about is the importance of tech and creativity, how all of these ideas are going to start merging together, and how do we bring it together so that we can virtuously resemble a true community that we want to see in the future. Culture really plays a significant role in who we are as individuals, but more so who we are as a community. Those kind of things have allowed me to transgress into this environment that I am today at Launchpad, really allow us to build out this whole sector around creativity and creative industries, and realize the importance that they do play in the communities that we're in. When you look at minorities in Canada and the challenges that they face, I don't think we can clearly say that they've all disappeared. We live in a multicultural environment, but we also live with preconceived notions. Look at how they're going to affect you, but also look at how you can make change from them. A lot of us will take that negativity and make it a part of who you are. Don't make it a part of who you are, make it a part of what you want to change. If we get lost in the negativity, we will never become a Canadian. How do we live in a world that's very multicultural, and how do we help to define who we want to be? I've had bad experiences as I grew up. Oddly enough, it wasn't in Ontario that I had that issue, it was more in BC. I was like, wow, you know, I'm the only person of color in this whole school of 700 kids. I'd never been in an environment where I was the only person of color. I never looked at myself as a person of color, but here for the first time I actually had to point to myself and say, yeah, you know what? I am ethnic, I am brown, and I have to accept who I am. And the more you accept that, the easier things are. I'm fortunate to live in a very multi-ethnic family. For us, color has never distinguished who we are. Who we are and our values are what actually distinguishes us. Not about the diversity, it's about inclusion. That's a more important subset of what we call diversity and inclusion. My kids may be Indian, but they're about as white can be. So for them, the important part is the inclusivity that they have. It's not the color of your skin. That's the way our discussions really need to change, more around how do we communicate with each other, but also how do we accept each other for who we are. Something that has really made an impression on me as an individual and really defined who I am today was really taking that step to say, I want to go do humanitarian work. I want to spend the time in emerging countries. I want to help and I want to give back to these communities. How do we progress these communities to be as strong and resilient as we are? So that was a really big, bold step for me. When I started, I thought I'd be gone for a year. I was there for 13 years. And that really was very impactful on me. It had a huge impact on my kids. My kids were fortunate enough to have traveled to a lot of these countries, played with kids there. When they're here today, they have a real appreciation for who they are and what they have. Working in these humanitarian countries, seeing poverty at a real level or seeing wealth at a real level have made an impact on me and have really defined who I am and given me more to appreciate who we are as individuals. Didn't come this far to only come this far is one where you say to yourself, I'm not done yet. And whether that is me being here today in Toronto or whether that is me being somewhere else in the world in a few years, it just means I'm not done yet. There's so much more to do. Part of who I am as a person wants to look at how do I continuously give back from what I learn at different parts of my career. I look at being at Launchpad as an experience, as part of my learning, but there's something more after that. What's next? Where do I go with what I've learned to give back? How do I give back? How do I create communities? How do we bring people together that normally don't come together? That's what's important. We always listen to advice that people give us as we move into new countries, as immigrants, as new Canadians, and whether you have the language or whether you don't have the language, whether you have the context of what it means to be here, we always hear about doing your best, that it's important to follow your dreams. I actually would say that it's more important to follow the footsteps in those that have come before you. Have an understanding and an appreciation as to what everyone's been trying to do here. Take that to be part of who you are. As you look at becoming a Canadian, look at ways that you don't assimilate, but more importantly, integrate into the Canadian fabric. Keep your heritage, keep your background. Those are all immensely important values that you bring to this environment, to Canada that you're in. It's not what you do, it's how you do things. It's how you interact with everybody. Because that's going to help define who you become as a person. Look at things also from your own personal spiritual perspective. I think we all tend to forget about who we are. As you do things, do them from your heart. Don't always just do them from your brain. Because the brain can play games on you, but your heart will never play a game with you. Be true to yourself. That's more important. Your values will become to define who you are. My name is Karim Rahemtulla, and I didn't come this far to only come this far.